Hi, I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
And we're the hosts of the Chasing Tomorrow podcast, where we bring you stories that delve into the science and spirit behind intriguing people doing extraordinary things. Welcome to the Chasing Tomorrow podcast, episode 49. I do have a little bit of a surprise. Dave is not with me today, so you're going to all have to sort of suffer with me as just the only host. But I think because we have two amazing guests, we're going to balance this out. We have Katie Vesco on with us, and then her surprise support guest here, which we'll talk about in a second. And 2009, Katie sort of took to one of the great challenges of sort of American running, which is to run across America. I think there might be a total of 300 people who have done this. It's a small group. But when Katie did it, she was 23. I think you were the second youngest person to do it. And, that in and of itself was enough. But then she waits 10 years later and decides to do something even harder, to run from north of Australia down to the south, 2,112 miles. But this time she brought Henley, her husband, with her because he was going to bring all the equipment, everything they would need to be self-supported, and do it pulling all that stuff behind him on a bicycle. Now, I think they may have a film coming out, which they'll talk about, where you'll get to see, you should look at the trailer for argument's sake, because you'll see how hard this really was. An extraordinary and amazing accomplishment. And so we're really thrilled to have Katie and Henley on. So welcome to the podcast.
Wow, what an intro. Thank you. Yeah, we're excited to have some fun talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah, so where we love to start is a little bit of sort of like, how does this happen? When you were young, were you guys athletic? Did you run in track in high school? Were you always going to sort of be like in the back of your mind an ultra runner or just a endurance person? Tell us a bit of the history, how it sort of happened from the beginning.
Okay, from the way back. You're going way back.
Yeah, I love that part.
I'll go way back with you. Okay, so I've always been a runner. I know that I started when I was in middle school. I thought of it kind of just as a way to be with other people and have a community of friends. That's why I stuck with it, because I really, really had fun with the other girls that I was running with. So in middle school and then in high school, year round, all of it. And then in college, year round, cross country and track, and I absolutely loved being part of a team. It was so fun and quirky, and you get together a bunch of long distance runners, and we just always tell you stories, so many stories. So I fell in love with running at a very early age, and I knew that it could take me places, and I think just having an adventuresome spirit, I used running as a way to go and travel.
Nice.
And I think maybe that's how Henley and I fell in love, actually.
Oh yeah, we might have to hear about how the two of you guys linked up, because that would be a fun part of the story as well. Henley, you a runner or a cyclist as you grew up?
I was athletic in general, did a little bit of everything. Running was never like a specific thing that I was interested in until college, because high school had come and gone and you had to find something to do to stay relatively in shape. So I stumbled across running. I was a Peace Corps volunteer right after college, and some of my best friends from that were runners, and kind of like got me to stay in it and stay with it. So I ran my first marathon when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, a terribly slow and agonizing marathon. But there was something enjoyable enough about it that I stuck with it. And then, yeah, Katie and I met through running a number of years after Peace Corps, just through shared running circles when we were both living in Austin, Texas.
Hill country, huh?
Yeah.
So what was the story? Tell us, one of you, tell me, how did it happen?
I'll tell you because I love telling it. So
yes.
Mutual friend Andy, hi Andy, but mutual friend said, I remember this. I was out for a run with Andy, and he said, "You got to meet Henley. He's kind of nuts." And then Henley, who's you?
Well, kind of the same thing. I had met Andy and his group of friends, but without Katie on a couple of runs. And we were just talking about travel and different things. And Katie had obviously done some stuff. So he just put two and two together. Two people like to run, travel, live, and kind of unconventional ways. Katie had lived in a tent in a backyard in Austin, Texas. I was living in my truck in the city at the time. So we had just come off of like unconventional living situations, and he was like, you gotta meet each other.
You gotta meet. And we met. We went for a run early in the morning, and we're just friends for a few years. But then we fell in love.
Wow, I love this. This is great. And how long are you guys married?
It's been 3.5 years.
All right, you're on a good track here.
Yeah.
Huh. And you, well, we'll talk about it in a little while, but I want to talk about running across America before we get to Australia. If you survive doing that together with Australia, I think you guys might be able to survive just about anything. But all right, so you're Katie, you're a runner, high school, college, you love it, friends stuff. Like honestly and truly, there's so few people. I mean, many of us think about running across the U.S. It's like a one of those big dreams, but it's somewhat impractical. You got to get a lot of time off from whatever life is. You got to get some kind of support system. You got to be capable. Like, so how did you get that bold? How did you do the plan? How did that come together?
Yeah, I think just I have to give a lot of credit to the environment in which I grew up in, and that is just an environment that really told me that I could do anything I dream of. Really, anything I dream of, and the messaging in my upbringing was you are capable of anything you dream of. And so right out of college, I knew that I wanted to experience life to the fullest, and I wanted to do whatever I did in benefit of other people, like to be of service. And so I love this aspect of the question that you pose. It's like you have to take a lot of time off to do the things that you really want to do. But for me, I think of it in an opposite or an inverted way. And like, if I didn't do the things that I love to do, if I didn't prioritize running across America, which was a burning desire in my chest for years, it's like, well, am I living? And I know that there's so many ways to live, but for me, it was absolutely worth prioritizing because I knew it was something I absolutely had to do, and I had a very strong reason for doing it. And so that's what led to the America run. And I think that I at least try to live up to that kind of mentality, or that kind of, I guess, way of going about prioritizing things in my life to this day. At least I try.
Well, no, it sounds like you're succeeding. I'd like to dig into this a little bit because, Dave and I have talked about this a lot with people about not needing permission to live the life one needs to live, right? You need to. This isn't a want. This is a need. Katie needs to live that way. Henley, you lived, make these choices. But the core, right, which is you said you had lived and grew up in an environment that told you could do anything you wanted to do.
Yeah.
So often we hear the exact opposite in life, right? No, you can't do that, or you're not capable, or you're not worthy. And it's like, isn't it amazing the impact that, so there's a lot of power in this system of who we are.
Yeah.
But we can crush it or we can enable it. And so it sounds one like you got it enabled and then you took off on that. And so maybe a little bit about, as you went through that journey, so you found it yourself, how do you think about like giving advice to some people who are sometimes struggling to get outside of the constraints they feel that they're stuck within?
Yeah, that's such a hard one because I don't know about putting myself in anyone's shoes. I would love to hear what Henley has to say about this too. But it's hard. It's hard to be empathetic, and at least I try. But if I was to put myself in anyone's shoes who might be struggling to get out to actually live the life that they're worthy of living, I would say just go put yourself in a room with yourself and listen to what is actually coming up for you. If you were to just like be yourself in a vacuum, what is it that you actually want and why? And at least you can start from there. I can't imagine how hard it would be to get rid of the voices that are in your environment that are maybe not supportive, or maybe the voices that are inside your own head. So I think that's a really tricky question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Henley, you have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the onus is on us as people who are fortunate to be in a situation where we feel comfortable and confident to go and do these kinds of things, to do the best that we can to recognize when there is someone who says like, oh man, I would love to do what you're doing, and it follows something. I mean, we hear that quite a bit, and I understand where that's coming from. And so I think part of the answer is for us to recognize that in other people and invite them on a run, invite them to listen to a podcast that's inspiring. Sometimes people just haven't they haven't had the opportunity or they haven't had the friend group or the community, right, which is what we're talking about. So recognizing when that's kind of what's missing for someone and trying to be the person that steps in and pulls them in a little bit. Um, that's what I think about the most. Just trying to. It's one thing to just talk about it, but it's not like, hey, come on a run with me.
Right.
Okay, let's do the next thing, which is a run plus this, and just trying to build them up because a lot of it is confidence, right? Like we need the confidence to take the steps, and sometimes it's too scary for people to do it on their own. So if you can kind of help them into it, I think that's on us.
I like that. I think there's that dimension, which I totally agree. And then there's sort of dimension of maybe hanging out with the wrong people. If there are people who are taking energy away from you, telling you what you can't, then stop staying with them. Like, why would you want to hear that? And, a lot of it is that's one choice we make. And the second is having people who are willing to bring you into the community. The early part of my sort of journey was, it was the era of, oh yeah, it was a magazine and you could read about people and what they did. And if you wanted to train, you probably had to go out on your own. And that's okay too. Like that's okay if I just run 1 mile or I just hike up one hill. And, it doesn't have to be the run across America to start. And so I like to encourage people. The other thing is, if you do get someone into your community, never make them feel bad, right, about what they're doing. Like go at their pace, like encourage them, and rather than say, "Oh, well, I'm not fast enough to go with you guys, or not strong enough." Like, of course you are. Like we all go at the same pace when we're together. So I do think there's stuff we can do.
Yeah.
And so you finish. Any really cool stories, Katie? What was it like running across America? Tell us a little bit about the people, whether terrain, how hard it was, like what's your lasting memories?
My lasting memories are all about the people.
Yeah.
Like in a very high percentage, like 90% people and 10% terrain. I would say that so many stories, like a father of four coming out in the middle of Kansas just to snap a photo with me for his kids, and like just the most enthusiastic person because he wanted to show his kids what a young woman can do.
Yeah.
Something like that. And then also just I have a little story that kind of relates to what we were just talking about. I remember this one woman, Sherry, she started running and she was overweight at the time and told me her story. And what she did is it was so hard for her, but what she did is she did light post by light post. So one day she decided to start running and she literally ran about a block.
Yeah.
And then the next day, just to simply to the next light post. And eventually she got to a point in which she's running long distance and she came out to run with me across America, and just hearing stories of people's struggles and the things that they think about, and also all the cultural differences across the nation 10 years ago. I mean, kind of before social media. It was just really interesting to be in people's homes to see how they break bread and how they talk to their kids and what's important to them in their daily life. It was so eye-opening for me at a young age.
Yeah, I imagine. Ricky Gates was on the podcast.
Yes,
And
yes.
he ran across America uh, from east to west, an unusual and actually this unusual route. But his whole thing was, I'm running to just meet the people.
Yep.
We had Pete Kostelnick on. He ran across America. Of course, he has the record running across. And then he did the Alaska to Florida. So, but in each of the stories, it's the same. I did that 6 continent challenge. All I do is remember the people and the ones who came with you. Like someone said, I never ran 10K before, but I just did running alongside you. It's just this, I don't know. It feels like they want, you're there to help them experience what they want to experience, which is just sort of one of the great parts of it. And when you did this, so you're young. I mean, 23 is young, not to mean like you're not capable, but it's an early stage of what we get to experience. I guess it's probably formative then in terms of then how you felt about the rest of just living at that point.
Oh, without a doubt. It was a young age. I mean, looking back, absolutely. And I wouldn't have traded that experience for the world. I'm so glad I did that at that time. How that's influenced my perspective now is that I can't tell you. I mean, I heard so many people share with me how they have blocks in their life from doing the things that they love to do. And I guess to give a little context, every night for 9 months, I stayed in the home of somebody across the country. We didn't camp, we didn't stick to ourselves, we stayed with other families and humans
Wow.
to take us. And so we're talking like really getting to know people in a short amount of time. And more often than not, I just heard so many dreams and not as much action and a lot of blocks. And
Yeah.
so because of that, and it just really supported this viewpoint and commitment I have in my life to always prioritize my dreams, because at the very least it'll be an example to others who are struggling to even take a first step. And I know there's so many people who are struggling to take a first step. So I mean, that run infused me with a lot of purpose.
Yeah. I love that. And back to, it's like one of the things that always appealed to me about hiking and running is that I loved having some activities I didn't have to pay to go to do. There's so much of life like, oh, I go to Disney World, I got to pay. If I go to a movie, or if I got like, I just like the idea, right? That you can do something that we just have the freedom to go and do. And in that, that freedom starts to open up how we think, right? Which is what you experienced. And then to get to see the people of the country and both their struggles, and then that the intimacy that you were able to share with them, and to encourage people to go do some of these kinds of activities. I think that role modeling of behavior, albeit in an extreme way, but you localized it, is really very powerful. And, I don't know that a lot more people will run across America, but we certainly can get a lot more people sort of just out the door, even if it is just for light post to light post, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And so Henley, as so you met Katie years after the Cross America experience. When you found out that she had done that, what did you think?
Well, I was definitely intimidated, and the first thing we were gonna do was go for a run. And I was intimidated on the running level and embarrassed of my living in my vehicle situation at the time.
What?
Yeah, a little bit, because yeah.
No.
Um, but in terms of like running together, I thought, oh man, like I run, but I'm not a runner. Like I do it because I need to do something. But like Katie is a runner. Um, but I just remember like meeting and running for the first time. It was casual and fun, and
Hmm.
yeah, it was no big deal. The reason I was embarrassed is because I had to get my shoes out of the back of my truck, and of course that's where all my stuff was, and it smelled like bananas because I had overripe bananas in there.
You're living out of your van.
I'm like, oh man, I hope she doesn't smell the back of my truck. That's why I was embarrassed. Yeah.
Oh.
But yeah, running. I mean, running has been an important thing for the both of us together for a long time as friends, and
Mhm.
shared our. There was a time where we had like an Excel spreadsheet, and we would share like our training plans and our log and stuff. So it's been something that we bonded over and have obviously stuck together as a couple for a long time now.
Yeah, good example of just sort of having that shared experience, right? And then continues to build. And I don't know if when you heard about that experience, if you said to yourself, okay, well, one day we're just going to run across Australia and I'll ride my bike. So we'll have to sort of work our way into this, because that's like, when you meet someone who's done those extreme activities, you sort of wonder, like, what do you want to do next? I'm sure that you must have asked her many times over, Katie, okay, now what's going to happen? So how did that sort of start to bubble up?
Um, the idea for Australia, well, like we kind of supported each other in the things that we wanted to do in the interim between that. So like the year we met, the following year I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail.
Oh, you did? Oh, tell us about that for a little bit.
Yeah.
Cool.
That was in 2014. So I hiked in 2014.
It's
And
really a hard, so just tell people a little bit, the Pacific Coast Trail, it's long, it's hard, it's arduous. Tell us a little bit about it.
yeah, so it runs, from border to border. You can start either way, but I went from the California-Mexico border,
Yep.
way up to the U.S.-Canada border. And depending on the year, it's a little over 2,600 miles,
Wow.
depending on fire closures and that kind of stuff. And I did it in a very like typical time through hiker fashion, where you take more time off than you need sometimes in trail towns. So it took me and some friends who did it together about 5 months to do it.
Wow, that's amazing. So you're camping out on the trail,
Yeah,
right?
it's essentially if you envision a 3 to 4 day backpacking trip that you might do, you leave with your food, you've got your route, you just do that continuously for 5 months until you get there. So when you think about it, it's like, oh man, 5 months is a long time. But really, I mean, if you feel comfortable anywhere from 3 to 5 days hiking and taking care of yourself, just do that back to back for a long time, and you get to Canada. And that's
Wow.
kind of the way I thought about it, because I had done nothing like that prior to it. I had it in my mind that I wanted to do longer and longer hiking trips and cycling trips, but the timing just worked out to where I had some friends that wanted to do it, and the time, and so yeah, we did it.
Any wild animal encounters while you were out there?
It was actually pretty mellow, except for in the desert. Everyone's worried about heat and snakes.
Yeah.
Um, Both were an issue, but I just remember everything that moved on the side of the trail that made a noise. I just immediately thought rattlesnake, like ready to strike. Um, and that obviously wasn't always the case. And you'd get to the point to where in the middle of the day, the snakes would be just stretched out across the trail, and all they want to do is they just want to take in the sun. And so by the time we got used to that, you're just stepping over sleeping or sunbathing rattlesnakes, not even thinking about it. But at the beginning, it's a big deal. You're pretty worried about it. But by the end, it's like, whatever, it's just a rattlesnake.
See what we
Yeah,
can condition ourselves to?
yeah,
I
that,
gotta love that. All right,
yeah.
so you did PCT, that's amazing. Katie's done Run Across America. How does this Venn diagram overlap over the coming years to a plan? I mean, because I know from planning my 6 continent challenge, it took me a while. This is like these things take way longer to plan than to do. Uh, and so, how did the Australia idea come together?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll start, because before the PCT, I was on a cycling trip, um, and it got cut short because I got robbed. Um, and so my cycling trip was cut short 2 weeks into it.
They stole his bike.
They stole my bike, and I was in another country and stole my bike in the middle of the night.
Oh no!
But my thinking was okay. I had my bike. I only took 2 panniers, and a bike can carry 4 and more. And so in 2015, when Katie brought up the idea of running across Australia and what I'd like to be a part of it, my instant thought was, well, I could support you on a bike, not knowing anything about what the reality would be. And my rationale was, I had traveled before with 2 panniers. I know that I can put 2 more. That'll account for Katie's stuff, and we'll just it'll, good to go. We'll just do it. So that the idea to bike support was there very early on. That was 2015, and so maybe Katie can talk a little bit more about why it took us 4 years to actually.
She was trying to tell you that it wasn't going to be so easy.
Yeah.
Do you want me to continue the story?
Oh yeah, please. I'm hanging on this one. I want to hear the whole thing.
So before I met Henley, I was actually just beginning to plan the first attempt of running across Australia, because I honestly had wanted to do it for a very long time. And so 2013, it's like I'm training and making promotional videos, and I showed you that video, and super excited about it and rallying the community, and I just injured myself, and so training, and so the whole thing was just called off. And then Henley comes around, and we start talking about him supporting on a bicycle, and it's just like, yes, this man needs to come with me. He's my buddy. Let's do this. And it's 100% human powered, which we both really liked that idea.
Yeah.
And so I trained for it again. We fall in love over the course of us planning for Australia. So Australia is kind of like a really important trip for us as a couple, because we literally fell in love during the planning process. And that's when Dina met us. And then, let's see.
You got injured again.
I got injured again, and so call it off. So we went to go cycle across Thailand instead. And then we got married. Okay, I'll just tell you the whole story.
Yeah.
But in 2018, on the eve of Halloween, I'm lying in bed. I had just watched Free Solo in theaters the night before, and I'm like, well, shoot. this Australia run is still calling my name. I can't go to my deathbed not doing this thing. And so it was then, after watching that film, like, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. We're going to start this July 2019. And so Henley comes home from work that night, and I say, I'm doing Australia. We're doing this. Third time's a charm. And so that's how it all came to be. And he was luckily still interested in riding a bicycle.
Wow. So I love that. Alex Honnold, for those of you who are our listeners, probably all have seen Free Solo, a journey that he was on to do one of those most extraordinary acts we've ever seen in physical activity, climbing up the side of El Cap with no rope. Just that is just sort of pretty crazy. But, and what I loved, what he always said was the playoff between risk and consequence.
Mm-hmm.
The consequence high, risk was low in his mind, meaning probability was low, but if it does happen, it's pretty tragic. Where everyone thinks high risk, is high probability, but he was so trained and so ready. So sometimes we can do these things where to others, they don't really understand that we're sort of ready, because we both have the mindset and the physicality to do that. So, all right, so now you guys are inspired again, locked in on doing it. Uh, had you always known the route that you were going to do? And tell us about the route.
The route changed quite a bit. At the very beginning, it was going to be west coast to east coast.
Yep.
Um, and then it changed for a lot of different reasons based on when we thought we could go and the timing of weather. So when it came time around to the third time, it made most sense to go north to south. We had lived in Austin, Texas, like I mentioned, and Austin happened to be the sister city of Adelaide. And so, that'd be a neat place to finish. And then it just made sense to go the opposite coast from there.
Mm-hmm.
But really, one person who helped us out a lot is Pat Farmer, who is a legendary ultra runner from Australia. And he's done a lot of stuff and was able to advise us on in terms of when to start and what would make sense for weather. So the third time around, we knew that it was just going to have to be Darwin to Adelaide based on the weather.
And the other part of it was like there's been some bike trips, and even I think there was a run or two. I actually don't know, but like the west to east route had been done before. Like people bike that, it's all on the road, and I wanted something a little bit more unique and off-road. And so Henley put together a route that was a little bit more remote than what the west to east would have been.
A lot of bit more remote.
Thanks for making me laugh. So Australia is a rather large country / continent, and there's about 24 million people who live in the entire country, and they're very concentrated. Sydney and Melbourne have the predominance so the rest of the place is pretty empty. Save the few creatures that can live in the rock in the middle for sure. So it's funny when you say it, because I don't know if a lot of people understand that, like the Los Angeles area probably has more people than all of Australia. So now you're going to set out to do this. You're going to go from Darwin to Adelaide. You're going to see pretty much very few people, maybe some vehicles along the way. And some, I'm sure there are people along the way. So, all right. So did you guys bring all your stuff with you? Did you go there and then procure? Tell us a little bit and then what was the estimated number of days? And then we'll talk about how it plays out.
So if you look at the map and you think, oh, in Adelaide, there's a logical route, which is the Stewart Highway, which is a paved road pretty much cut right down the middle. And we wanted something off the highway, mainly, well, I guess 2 reasons. Sorry. We assumed it would be a little more fun in a strange way to be off by ourselves on tougher roads. And also safer. Like we didn't want to be on the main road trying to bike and run with everything else.
The main reason for me, because I always wanted to go across Australia because I wanted the isolation in order to really just be with myself and my thoughts and like have it be one of those pilgrimages type of thing. And I didn't think I could get that on a highway.
Right.
So that was my personal reason for the off-roading.
Yeah, that's cool.
That too. Yeah.
But in terms of how like the logistics of getting, we took the bike, the trailer, all of our gear. We had a good chunk of food that we took from the very beginning, but drawing from my experience on the PCT, one way to resupply on the PCT, or I guess the way to resupply is send yourself boxes of food in advance and you pick it up when you go through town. So we just didn't have any choice but to do that because there weren't going to be many places for us to go through. So we sent enormous boxes of food out to these communities out, in the middle of the outback. And so that's what we took pretty much the first week in Darwin to do. Was we went and bought heaps of food, packaged them up, made phone calls to make sure these places would accept a package and hold it for us, and then send it out and crossed our fingers that it would arrive. And part of the point of doing that rather than buying in the community is that these communities are an 8-10 hour drive from Darwin or from Adelaide to resupply these remote communities. So you're paying 3 to 4 times the price for goods. So it just would have been way too expensive.
Yeah.
And just the amount of variety. We had resupplies that needed to last 17 days. So we'd pick up a box and there'd be 17 days worth of food in there. And so we couldn't necessarily count on going through a store and having the variety or the quantity that we needed to get us through each chunk. So that's how we tackled those logistics.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So you're camping each night along the way. Is that what you guys were doing on this trip?
Yeah.
So, all right. So what else? So so Katie's running. Henley, you got the bike and you had a trailer behind you, if the picture I remember right.
Right.
And what were you carrying with you? What was the supplies you had?
So the trailer, which was kind of the biggest burden of the whole thing, could carry 100-liter capacity for water.
Okay.
So that was the bulk of the weight. 100 liters of water is a lot of water weight.
It is.
220 pounds just of water. And then had a big 40-liter dry bag for the really remote stretches where we had to have basically, an extra pantry's worth of food on the back.
Yep.
Essentially every bike bag that you can imagine that goes on a bike, I had it on my bike for our personal stuff, both of our camping, sleeping bag, sleeping pad, repair kit, filming equipment, more food, everything that you can think of. If you have a serious problem out there, no one's coming to you very quickly. So you have to at least be able to take care of yourself, food and water, while someone comes and helps you if you need that kind of help. So we carried everything that we needed.
So those first few days, they were like, oh my God, what did I get ourselves into? Like, what's that first bit is probably the most interesting, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Let us tell you the first 10 minutes, which was even better.
Well, the first 10 minutes were hilarious because for some reason, I guess we just had a lot to take care of. We ended up starting a couple hours late, but we're at the beach in Darwin. And so we set up a tripod to film kind of our start, and Henley wheels his bike down onto the beach so that we can at least take a photo of us with the ocean and dip the tire into my shoes. And so we're filming this, and after we film kind of us by the ocean and take a picture, it's 10 minutes just to get from I don't know how many feet, 20 feet, to push the trailer through the sand. That was the beginning of our trip. Ready, set, go. I'm pushing the trailer as Henley's pushing the bike through the sand. It was definitely a foreshadowing of what was to come.
It was easy getting down to the beach because there's a little embankment down to the beach, and I didn't consider the 350 pounds push back up to the.
Oh my God, friction, gravity, all working against you at that moment, huh? Like, okay, well, this is how these journeys start, right? So you get going, and now what were you trying to average a day in terms of mileage?
Yeah, so it was 30 miles a day.
Yep.
And so I would do about 4 chunks, 3 chunks in the morning. It's 7.5 miles or 7, or it was something like that. But it all ended up being 30 miles a day. And we'd take a 3 to 4 hour break in the middle of the afternoon under some man-made shade from a tarp or a tiny little bush. Mostly we had to make our own shade. And then I'd go out for the last 7-8 miles in the late afternoon.
And did you get into a reasonably good rhythm with it, or is the terrain changing so much that, it's oh boy, lots of things to consider?
It took us a while to get into a good rhythm. The The first 8 to 10 days, we were essentially doing it wrong. This guy I mentioned, Pat Farmer, was kind of our mentor while we were there, and we were starting too late. Like it wasn't the really hot time of year, but it was still warm, and we were starting too late. Um, the initial shade that we had just wasn't gonna, our shade tarp wasn't gonna work. So by about 10 days in, we had a lot happened in the first 10 days, but about that time we started like we'd get up a lot earlier. We'd get most of the miles out by the hot part of the day,
Mhm.
and it was just 3 or 4 hours of just sitting under the shade tarp, hanging out with the flies, trying to find ways to pass the time. So it took a couple of weeks to get in a good rhythm. And in terms of the terrain changing, this was something that we didn't quite foresee to the extent, but the first few hundred miles were on paved, on a highway until we got really out into the outback. And I could roll at a better pace than Katie, obviously, on that. But as soon as we got out into the tracks and the corrugations and the sand, like Katie could walk faster than I could ride the bike. So we had to just keep each other in our sights because she could get ahead of me really quickly. Um, and so the rhythm definitely had to change a lot whenever we were on the road versus the dirt tracks.
Yeah. That's when Henley got a nice wake up call. Those corrugations were.
Yeah, I think, that, well, yeah, it's not easy to ride, pull all of that. I mean, the torque that you were trying to put out to keep the thing moving was probably extraordinary, and then frustrating because you can't really get to any kind of pace.
Right.
And you're going to be doing it for a lot of hours. So it's interesting because we always think biking is easier, but that's usually because we're, 20-pound bike and that's about it. So, Katie, and because Henley, we don't want to like ignore how hard physically, but how did you feel running? How were you, like, how was any injuries in the beginning, going along nicely, feeling just resting well at night and getting back up? Or was there a good amount of soreness as you started going?
I would say I don't remember soreness. I would say that the first 8 to 10 days were really like the wake up call for my body because I just felt really heavy and like a brick.
Yeah.
But after we started waking up earlier, I actually felt good. It was mostly like mentally getting through the miles. So about halfway through the trip, I had my left foot start to hurt. It would come and go, but it started to hurt. And then like the second half of the trip, I had some knee problems, and so I walked quite a bit just
Yep.
and then for some reason, the knee actually miraculously got better after about a week of walking and walk running. So, but when the Henley helped me through this, but when the body spirals, the mind spirals too. And so when my body wasn't having it, that's when I had all these thoughts about me doing this thing and like, what's the point? And this is dumb. I mean, I didn't believe those thoughts. I really didn't. I really don't think I didn't believe those thoughts. Like, no, it wasn't dumb, but my mind still had them.
Mm-hmm.
So that was interesting too.
Yeah, I think that's the complication of our neurotransmitter system and how it works. And sometimes it's sort of playing with us in ways that, we're not sort of appreciating at the level of, what's happening with the wiring. Yeah. So that's one of my questions I have. So very different than going across America. You're staying with different people every night, sort of like you got the energy of all those people. Here, you're sort of out in the middle of nowhere most of the time, just the two of you. And, we appreciate you two still love each other, and that's awesome. And that's a great, great thing for both of you. But so maybe I'll go to you, Henley. So you have this, you're struggling because it's not easy. And then you have your partner who's probably having some days that are a little challenging. Like, how do you deal with that? Like, what was some of the things you were doing to sort of like say, well, I'm okay, even though I'm not the happiest guy in the world because this hurts. But, my partner here is struggling. How did you help her? What did you say? What did you think?
Yeah. The first kind of conflict with me and myself as a support person is, if you've done any kind of event where you have a support crew, you expect your support crew, like when you come into the aid station or when you see them, they need to have everything ready to go and you're in and out. And what if they might be tired or hot, but it doesn't matter because they're there to support you. And so that was the mentality that I brought to this was and it was even to the extent was that I didn't really see the trip as my own. It was Katie's trip, and I was just there to essentially facilitate it with food and water. Um, and when it got to be hard for me physically and mentally, I hadn't invested myself in the same way mentally, and so it was hard for me to kind of like get through the struggle because I was still seeing it as Katie's trip, and I was just there.
Yeah.
And so that was a really important conversation that we had and was a turning point. Like this is about obviously both of us getting through it. Um, and so that was helpful for me to have a perspective shift. Like it's okay for me to like this is my trip too. It's hard for me too. It's an athletic pursuit for me as well. And it just shifted my perspective a little bit to where when I was having a low moment, because when I'd have those low moments, I was getting really frustrated with myself because Katie, like I said, Katie could run faster than I could pedal, and I was getting pretty frustrated with my situation and me holding Katie back, and um, but there was a perspective shift that definitely helped. And in terms of one of us having a high or low moment and vice versa, I don't know if it's luck or just in hindsight, one of us put our own struggles to the side for the moment, but it felt like whenever Katie was really low, that I was in a place to be able to support her and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if that was actually the case or if it was, many acts of selflessness over the course of the trip that made it realize like, okay, he's suffering more than me right now. I'm going to put my knee pain to the side or vice versa.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's just a subconscious decision that was made in an instant to be able to, take care of the other person in that moment. And I think that's one of the benefits of doing something as a couple is that you kind of intuitively know those kinds of things. And if you don't, you'll figure it out really quickly along the way.
True.
Yeah.
What a great life lesson, though, right? I think that's sort of what we're sort of here for. There's none of us who are going to sort of like live in this state of, high all the time, right? And bliss, and there's a reality, especially when we go and do harder activities, it's not and it doesn't have to be running across Australia. It could be anything that we try and go out. I want to, I don't know, become a tennis player. I want to become a teacher. And whatever it is, there's some difficulty because the learning system, right, and the physical system have to adapt, and it's how we improve is going through the struggle. Uh, so being able to understand, and maybe in some sense, because you both had a struggle, you could relate to the struggle. Because if you don't, then it's hard to relate. Like, what's the problem, Katie? What's the matter with you? Don't like just keep like, but you knew because you were. I don't know if that sort of is part of what you found as you went along, because you were there for a long time. What was the total number of days?
It was 4 months or 119 days.
Yeah, so this is a while.
Yeah. To your point, I think it is an interesting thing to think about how one of us supported the other and why. And I'll tell you from my perspective, I noticed myself really feeling hurt when I saw Henley hurting.
Mm.
Those were the hardest moments for me, and um, I want nothing more than to not see the love that I love, not like, what am I saying? I don't want to see the love of my life suffer.
Yeah.
Or be in pain or frustrated with himself. And so I actually remember moments of like, I wasn't thinking about my pain or my situation. It's just really hurt to see the other person. So it's like naturally, I felt like the energy went towards Henley when I saw him suffering. So maybe that was part of it too, in retrospect.
Yeah, true definition of empathy,
Yeah.
feeling
Mm.
someone else's pain and relating to a
Yeah.
level that's got sincerity to it, right? It's not just this sort of like, oh, okay, looks like your knee hurts. It's actually feeling it inside you. And I commend you guys for working through that. Let's talk about a couple of the crazy moments. I know I've looked at the trailer, so there's the fly moment. We got to talk about that. But it looked like a bunch of dust. Realize like dirty as all get out for the better part of 119 days. Tell me, like, pick two or three of those that will just be fun to hear.
I remember Rob. who brought the ice and like that amazing experience. And then just in general, the flies were horrendous. Before coming to Australia, we were told the single most important item that you need to bring is a fly net or a head net. Yeah, fly net for your head.
Yeah.
So without that, I honestly think that the trip wouldn't have been possible.
Wow.
The flies were that bad that I don't think we could have really eaten.
No, we couldn't have. And there
I
were
don't
plenty of
know.
times where we would eat with our fly net on. You'd pull it up, take a bite, and put it right back down, so flies wouldn't get into
Yeah,
your mouth like they eat.
yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're lying there, like in the afternoon breaks, you just know that the flies are just gonna come and fly all over you and land all over you. You just gotta get used to it. But at least there was the head net. That was the most important thing.
Oh boy. So let's just visualize this for a second. Like, so it's okay that the flies are on the rest of my body, but at least got my head covered. So I'm feeling sort of like big accomplishment here, huh?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, and and they don't sort of leave. That we all know this, right? Flies are pretty good at following us, right, for miles on end. And so you just got used to them being there all the time, huh?
You just had to. Yep.
Were there stretches where they weren't there because of the terrain change or anything?
The only thing that we could see that made it better was a good strong wind.
Yeah.
But the problem with a good strong wind is that it felt like it was seldom in our favor. And they're good, pretty strong headwinds, and it's
Crazy headwinds.
And so you think, oh man, no flies for today, but everything is slower. Putting up the tents, just you take the flies away, add in the wind. There's always something, some little thing.
Oh, that wind.
Yeah. Katie mentioned Rob. I feel like we should tell that story.
Yeah.
Earlier you asked about the time frame. We took off more time at the halfway point in Alice Springs, so I really kind of crisscrossed right across the Stewart Highway, hit Alice Springs, and we were there for 9 days. Like we took 9 full days off.
Okay.
And because of that and some other kind of mechanical issues that happened during that, we were in Southern Australia, the hot part of Southern Australia, later than we planned. And so it was starting to get, over 100 degrees sooner than we thought that it would. And it's hard to sit out and even under a shade tarp for 4 or 5 hours on 100 degrees and be comfortable. And it was like that for several days on end. And no water was cool. It wasn't cool enough at night to cool it. So you're just constantly drinking hot water, and it's just really, really uncomfortable. And that part of the terrain is also just very sparse. Like it's not a lot to look at, not a lot to hide from the sun. It's just really rough country. And we had this one particular day where it was about time for our midday break, but there was not a bush in sight to string a tarp from. Like, what are we gonna do? We kept going because we didn't have a choice. And we finally crested, and there was a little bit of a ancient wash, I'm assuming. There happened to be a few trees there. So we strung up the tarp, and we at least have a spot for some shade, sitting there, and you're just sweating. You're sweating, there's flies all over you. There's nothing you can do, but we had shade. And after a couple hours in there, we hear this car come just rattling down the corrugated roads. Like that car's not doing well. And it was this guy about our age who stopped and was like, "What the hell are you doing out here?" And he was out doing his trip, and there was the crossroads that we were going to get to the next day was about 17 miles away. And he stopped to just make sure we're okay. Well, anyway, he goes, and about an hour later, the same noise, rattling awful noise, comes back in the other direction. And he had gone into this Crossroads caravan park and bought a bag of ice and came back with a bag of ice. And we filled up our water bottles. We were getting ready to actually leave from our afternoon break and do the last little bit. We put ice in our bandanas to put around our neck, like
in my bra.
Ice and arm sleeves. And it couldn't have got any better in that moment. It was a rough part of the trip. It was hot, it was sweaty, and this guy went totally out of his way to go and get us a bag of ice. And
oh my God, so amazing. That is so cool. Without asking, right? He just does it and takes a lot of time. And knew exactly what you needed.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So what were you guys eating along the way? What was the diet? Yeah, bars, food, cooking. What were you guys doing?
Well, I actually worked with Dina, the
Yep.
nutrition mechanic, actually before heading to Australia to help me with my training and really create a plan for getting certain stuff in and enough in during the run. However, we knew that going to Australia, there would not be very many options, especially in our resupplies. So it's really just, we ate probably like 5 different things. That's like crackers, packages of tuna, packages of beans, pasta, and granola bars and oats.
Wow.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah,
We'd pack out some
pretty much
some
it.
fresh fruit from town. You know, if we went through a town that had it, we'd pack out a couple of things that would last a couple of days. But it was heavy on packaged meal. You know, packaged meals like yeah, rice and pot. And the tricky thing is with dehydrated stuff, you think, oh, you should take dehydrated stuff. It's lighter, but the water need to rehydrate that stuff and cook it. And water was one of our biggest worries. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
about
and
3 steam bags of rice was a big staple.
Oh yes, those were good actually.
Yeah.
that's good. Hey, boy, anything you like along the way. A lot of endurance athletes love coffee. Were you guys making coffee every day or not drinking coffee? No, you
Oh yeah,
were.
I'm a big coffee drinker. Katie would drink tea in the morning, but that was, oh man, I'm not much of a morning person, and that was the thing that got me through, especially the mornings in the corrugated roads in the sand, where like I couldn't see anything, but I could feel that it sucked, and all I wanted was to get through the first hour to the first light where it set up the stove, make tea and coffee, and like
It was
just chill out for a
wonderful.
little bit. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Oh God. So now let's talk about like the last third. So you're sort of starting to think we're getting there. We've made it this far. Of course, we're going to finish. How was that part? Was it long? Did sometimes it takes longer than you feel, or did it start to get moving?
I would say that as soon as we hit pavement, which
Yeah.
was the town of Marie, we knew that all the dirt road was over and like Henley would be totally okay,
Yeah.
right? Like you kiss the pavement again and just, yeah, that part was done. I
Mm.
think so. The last third of the trip happened to be when I pulled my groin muscle. And
Oh.
so that was when like all my pain really started to get serious. And so it was just like an effort. It was an
Mm.
effort to finish. And I remember the last day breaking down and, in tears and just because of the pain and like, oh my gosh, when is this going to end? Um, having a head, like all the things that we had experienced across the country for 4 months, like all came back on the last day.
Can't even imagine. I want to come back to that, but I forgot to ask about this. How did you clean up along the way, shower or otherwise? What did you do?
Well, we had to be very calculated with knowing what our water usage was every day. So it
Yeah.
took the first couple of weeks to realize what do we use in a day, and as it got hotter, I had to adjust that. But basically, we had about a little 8-ounce collapsible cup, and that was essentially Katie's water ration for the evening to clean up.
You
And
did it too.
yeah, I did it. I wore sandals the whole time, and so my feet were always really dirty. And I just wanted to I wanted my feet to be clean. I guess I'm a pretty gross camper. Otherwise, I'm fine as long as my feet are clean when I go to bed. I'm okay. But the
Wow.
kind of the routine was like pour 8 ounces of water for Katie. She would do her thing with a bandana.
I'd soak the bandana and rub the bandana all over me versus
Yeah.
pour water on me. So you can get a lot out of those 8 ounces, sometimes less than 8 ounces.
Yeah.
Oh, and then when I really smelled, I put some drops of tea tree essential oil on the wet bandana and did my pits and like all the parts. So, I mean, honestly, I don't think I ever really felt gross except when I was on my period, which all women can probably relate to that when you're out on a long trip. How to manage that? It's a real situation.
It is. It is. I have two daughters, and they've taught me about stuff that I never knew or understood. So,
Yeah.
uh, and it's sort of one of those topics that's somewhat taboo. Nature of life, why we hide from it so much. If
Yeah.
you've been a climber or an outback person, you got to sort of understand there's things that happen, even if you want to make believe they don't every day. Like, we still go to the bathroom and we got to figure that out. And we have other needs that have to be taken care of. So, yeah, that's, it gets lost in the sort of, oh, well, we did the whole adventure and we got to the end. And you're like, yeah, I know, but there was some.
The great part about doing that in the outback is 95% of the time you take care of your business in the middle of the road if you want. There's no one driving by. There's no one around. Like you don't got to be modest. There's nowhere.
You know how many times we just walked around naked? Probably every day.
Yeah, to some degree. Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
It's wonderful.
Not in the film. Sorry, everyone.
Oh, we should put some in.
Well, yeah, we'll have the G-rated version of the film and what else comes out. But yeah, no, so in some sense, really, by the time you're done, you've been, sort of living in this desert environment outside for a long period of time. Did it get cold at night, on the desert when you were sleeping there?
It did the first half of the trip.
Hmm.
We didn't. Yeah. I don't really remember what the temperature was. It was enough to put like a puffy jacket on in the morning.
Okay.
And then again in the evening. But towards the latter half of the trip, it warmed up quickly, and the nights were comfortable. But towards the end, it wasn't puffy jacket weather towards the end.
Yeah. So you get to the end and relief. How you feeling?
Immense amounts of relief, while at the same time feeling like, God, how did we feel? At the same time feeling like we didn't want it to be over, but the whole trip we were wishing for it to come and be over because it was so hard. It was so hard. So it's just funny when you finally get what you're asking for, you realize, why were you even asking for that?
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say my body was so relieved. It was done. It was done running. And maybe Henley too?
Yeah.
Your body was.
That was enough. You didn't need another 500 miles to go.
Yeah, yeah. But I think.
No, go on.
Yeah, just in my spirit, I knew my gut was saying, I don't want this to be over. When can we do something like this again, Henley?
Yeah, so we'll get to that in a minute. The question that I think we always love to ask is sort of like, okay, because you've described, this wasn't a Club Med vacation here with people serving you margaritas and eating kebabs. So what the why? Like, I know you ran across America and that was tough and everything, but then you did this one, which is sort of even more raw. Like, do you have a good answer for that? The why? Why put yourself through that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, definitely strictly personal and maybe related to others, but I knew I wanted to run across Australia because I wanted to go face myself.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, when it got close to actually doing the thing, I realized, like, I want to see if I still had it. Like, I want to pinch myself. I don't want to be stagnant. I'm afraid of stagnation. And so I need to keep doing things that push my limits. And so, yeah, at the end of the day, Australia intrigued me because of the isolation and the pilgrimage sort of thing, and was intrigued by the walkabout part of like Indigenous culture there, even though I couldn't essentially have my own, but I could maybe experience what it could be like to have something like that in my own right. So that was my why. It was for myself.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Henley, you have I know you went there in support of, but then it ends up being yours as well.
Yeah. So initially, I was just all in to support Katie, and I guess, there was a turning point to where, like I said, it became about the two of us doing something together. And that's one thing that obviously is a big part of our relationship, is us doing things as individuals, but to do something together like that and to work through it together at the same time in such a way where we're both struggling physically and there's the highs and lows. Like, to have that experience with, your spouse is a pretty special thing. And it's something I hope that we do again. And I didn't know that was something. I just assumed I was going to ride my bike, like it was going to be a bike ride. I was going to help Katie. And I thought about thought it in far too simple of a mindset. But to be able to have that experience with someone, and it's one thing. I've done stuff with my friends, and it's great. You catch up and you talk about, oh, I remember that one time when we did this. But this is something we talk about, maybe not daily anymore, but for the first year or so after we finished, like it was a huge part of our daily reflection and conversation.
Yeah.
So to have gone through something like that with with your spouse is a pretty awesome thing.
Yeah, I don't think this is a good word for it, but it's a bit of a privilege, not that to have found that experience. Dave and I talk about it a lot. When I started the six continent thing, I wrote this note to myself that the lows would be the highs, that I was actually seeking out. It felt privileged to go find some feeling that you couldn't have otherwise, and then maybe you sort of make sense of life a little more, because sometimes it's hard to make sense of life through the lens of just everyday living. It's just a routine and not enough stimulation or enough challenge that would let us get deeper into who we are in our psyche. And I do think it's personal. I don't think the answer has to be the same for everyone, but there should be some answer.
Yeah.
Which then,
there's lots of things to worry about day to day, and we have things that we're worrying about right now that we think about, decisions we need to make, and it seems like every time there was something that felt massive, overwhelming in the moment in Australia, the next morning it would be resolved. Like the wind would have stopped, the flies were gone for a little bit, your ankle doesn't hurt for the moment, whatever it is. And so we had this kind of came up with this saying of tedious but brief. Like it feels so all consuming in the moment, but give it a little while and the moment's passed and that's it, and you're on to the next thing. Yeah. And so it's easy to come up with a phrase like that, and when you're hurting, be like, hey Katie, tedious but brief. Doesn't quite work that way, but I mean that is something that we use and talk about in our our daily decisions that we make now. We got things that we got to figure out, and it feels like a lot right now, but the decision will be made, and then it will feel silly in hindsight. That was a big takeaway for sure.
Good point, Henley. I need to remember that now.
Absolutely love that. That's just great advice for all of us, and ways to work on and what to think about. And yeah, so now it's a couple of years, I think maybe tell us a little bit about the movie and then we'll get to the Chasing Tomorrow question. So you guys filmed when you went along and now you've produced and we're going to get to see and experience it with you.
Yay!
Can't wait.
Henley did most of the filming and most of the work in general on the trip, but he did do most of the filming, and together we both filmed. But we do have a movie coming out. It's a 16-minute movie that we're super excited about and really proud about, to be able to show our story to people who want to watch it. So we just released the trailer for it last week, and we're aiming to release the full movie in June. So you'll get to come along with us and see footage that we haven't showed anyone really. But yeah, if people want to stay in the loop for that, you can just come onto our Instagrams and sign up for my newsletter or something. We'll announce it there.
All right. Yeah. And what are your Instagram handles for both of you?
I'm Katie Vesco, KatieVisco.
Okay.
And the website is katievisco.com, and you can sign up for the newsletter there, where I always send out fun stuff.
Okay.
About the film.
That sounds like a perfect thing for all of us to do, and then we can see the movie and share that wonderful experience. So yeah, so we always love to end the podcast by talking about what's you're chasing tomorrow, and what do you do next? Ideas? Can you share?
Yeah, we've got things.
We have big things.
Ooh.
They feel big.
Yeah.
Let's see. I've been intrigued by the FKT world for a while. The year that I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail was the year after Anish Heather Anderson set the self-supported record that still stands at the moment. And so I've been intrigued by that for a while. And so I'm gonna have a try at one this summer on the Oregon Coast Trail.
Oh, nice.
So that's coming up in too soon. It's coming up too soon. So like mid-June, I'm gonna go the supported route. So it's Katie's turn to.
Okay. Yeah. How many days, Henley, will it take if you meet your goal?
So the Oregon Coast Trail is kind of funny in that there's lots of different kind of alternates and ways that it could be done. But the idea that I'm thinking is it'll be about 51 miles a day for 8 days is the goal.
Okay. Wow. Big miles. That's great.
Sufferfest, Henley Phillips.
Yes. And how about you, Katie? What's next?
Well, I'm definitely supporting Henley and his FKT, so super excited to support him. And then in August, I'm actually going back to Australia to run across it again. No, I'm going back to run across it again for the most part, but from the center of the country to Byron Bay. And this is actually part of a team. We haven't publicly announced it yet, but it's part of a team. And I'm really excited about the project because there's 8 runners involved, and more to come on that soon. So again, like stick on our Instagram and my newsletter, and we're definitely going to be announcing that in the next couple weeks.
Okay. Well, I think that means that you're both going to have to be back on the podcast in the fall because we want to hear about Henley's Oregon Trail and Katie's revisit to Australia. And, who knows what else might happen in between. You have a spirit that is infectious and a positivity that we all should carry in this life. And I feel just better having talked to you guys for an hour. And I just can't wait for our guests to listen and just wish you guys the best and have fun, and let's stay away from the flies, and we'll go on this journey together. So thanks for chasing tomorrow with us, and really appreciate you being on the show.
That's so fun. Thanks for having us. This has been really fun. You're so sweet.
Thanks,
Katie. Thanks, Henley.